Yes, Simon mentioned I'm a former design manager of GM Australia Design, which used to be known as Holden Design. And really, it's a story of how Holden Design became GM Australia Design that I'm going to tell today in my presentation. I'd just quickly like to acknowledge some people that helped me with this presentation. Richard Filazzo and Peter Bramberg are both also ex-GMA Design. Chris Datatini from GM Design, and David Burrell of Retro Autos magazine. Well, the very early years of the Holden Design Studio have been very well documented by people like Norm, David Burrell and others. From the very first Holden through probably to the HR model of the mid-60s, which was actually the first car to be designed in Holden's Technical Centre in Port Melbourne. GM's experienced American designers really did exert quite a strong influence on the design of the local cars, and they provide a lot of oversight and mentoring to the local team. Full-size models were often shipped to America, like the E8 shown there at the bottom right, in one of the American studios, to be reviewed and assessed by the team over there, and feedback was sent back to the locals to do some more work. And the final design proposal was always approved or rejected by Detroit. However, as the Holden team gained more experience through the 60s, 70s beyond, across regular new model programs, they gained a lot of experience and became more autonomous and capable and required less supervision from headquarters. Designers were still transferred in both directions, a notable individual being Leo Pruno, of course, who actually stayed for quite a long time. But the amount of interaction between the two started to decrease into the 80s and 90s. Progress photos like these ones were still diligently mailed as a courtesy, but the level of feedback became less because the Australian team had become entrusted to make knowledgeable decisions for their own successful market. And due to Australia's small population and isolated location, design and other Holden departments have become very skilled at achieving a lot with a little in terms of budgets and staff numbers. And the tether between the headquarters and the outpost has become more tenuous. In fact, for a period, there was actually arguably a closer connection with the GM Europe studios. GM's Opel division were a source of complete vehicles that were just sold directly with Holden badges, or a source of platforms that were redesigned, redeveloped locally for the local market, including a number of Commodore models like this VN, which is based on the Opel Senator. But that said, visiting US designer Ted Schroeder did make a significant contribution to the VN, having visited Holden a few years previously as well and worked on previous programs. GM vice presidents of design, such as Chuck Jordan, would still visit semi-regularly to formally sign off new models, such as the VN shown here, alongside Director of Design at the time, Phillips Mood. And then later, Wayne Cherry, who was Jordan's replacement, visited for the VT Commodore approval. However, in the early 1990s, Michael Simcoe was one of the local designers who were occasionally still sent to the GM studios for some a different experience over in Warren in Michigan. Michael shown here working with Phil's Mood on the VQ long wheelbase version of the VN prior to going on that trip to the US. While he was in Detroit, Michael worked on the 1992 Buick Scepter concept car, elements of which influenced the design of the 1997 VT Commodore, which again was led by Philip. But early in the development of the VT, GM took an interest in the car as a possible US market Buick sedan. So a small team of designers and engineers, including Buick studio designer Eric Clow, were sent to Melbourne to help develop the left-hand drive version with some Buick brand cues. This was known as Project 127. Unfortunately, the production plans were cancelled after the design had been completed, but it did create a template for future cooperation between the two studios. And apart from that, the work was useful in enabling the left-hand drive Chevrolet versions for the export to Middle East, South Africa and Brazil. But as Norm just previously discussed, it was the reborn Holden Monaro that was based on the 1997 VT Commodore Coupe concept that fully reignited the relationship between Holden Design and GM Design. And again, as Norm described, a spark occurred when an American-born design program manager who was working in the Holden Design Studio in collusion with a compatriot in the engineering department, boldly emailed GM executive Robert Lutz about this fantastic new vehicle as a potential Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Also known as Maximum Bob, the maverick industry veteran and car nut had already driven the Middle East version of the Caprice that Norm mentioned. That was in the corporate car park, and had been very impressed by it, as was his wife apparently. And he saw a possibility for the car not as a Chevrolet, but as a Pontiac GTO. So the program was subsequently approved, and the left-hand drive conversion was actually relatively straightforward because of the earlier work that had been done on the VT export variants, with some additional work on bumper fascias and grills and so on that Richard and others worked on. So it did enter the North American marketplace to some interest, not just from the media and public, but even more so GM leadership, curious about how such a small isolated team on a low budget could develop such an impressive world-class vehicle. And by now, the VE Commodore was commencing development. Following the strong reception of the GTO, a niche was identified for a rear-wheel drive Pontiac performance sedan for North America. So this time, a large contingent of designers, engineers and other experts were sent from Warren to the Holden Technical Centre to ensure the vehicle met the US safety requirements, quality targets, Pontiac brand requirements, and so on. And these individuals were from the corporate culture of the Leviathan GM, which needed really disciplined processes to keep large, complex programs under control with thousands of staff involved. And it wasn't unusual for these engineers and designers that worked across the sprawling Warren campus to have never met face to face. And each one had their own swim lane of expertise. There was also a degree of conservatism in their approach, mainly to avoid the risk of product defects, warranty issues and litigation. To them, Holden was a culture shock. It was a tiny, proud, passionate team working in a relatively small facility and with very low budgets. Everyone knew each other, and individuals multitasked with a wide range of experience. This pride and flexibility sometimes resulted in risk-taking behaviours, with each department pushing for the best possible product, well, at least in their eyes. But most concerning to the Americans was the apparent lack of rigour and process, with decisions and timing seemingly recklessly overturned in pursuit of product greatness. In reality, it was all relative, and the job would get done thanks to the passion, hard work and commitment, but it did appear chaotic to the visitors. And this phenomenon became known as the Holden Miracle. An example of the Holden Miracle was the development of a colour radio display for the VE Series 2 upgrade, working with a new supplier to Holden. Many technical issues plagued this project, which would potentially impact the start of production date. So there was a very last minute change made to change back to a previous supplier Holden had worked with before. There were many long and stressful hours getting the car back on track, yet still made it on the road on time with a fully functioning radio, thanks to the team's dedication. While the Holden approach appeared chaotic, the Americans were impressed by the passion, commitment and camaraderie. It explained how they could punch above their weight, an expression that the locals used amongst themselves with great pride. However, the Americans saw an urgent need to impose some discipline, starting with what was called the 4-phase Global Vehicle Development Program, or that acronym. GM loves acronyms. To get TLAs, we got up to 5 or 6. It imposed strict timing gates and deliverables, which required accountability from everyone involved, including design. Now, designers looked at this very complex and quite ugly timing chart with absolute horror. It was very difficult for some of them who were used to spending their as long as possible finessing their design to really stomach this. But the efficiency benefits were obvious and pretty hard to argue. And in fairness, Holden's limited resources were recognised by headquarters, which did lead to increased headcounts and more opportunities for new local talent to be developed. So the VE was released as the Pontiac G8 and later as the VF Chevrolet SS, which had further improvements in quality and execution, thanks to GM's global expertise being shared with the local team. Meanwhile, in recognition of Holden's successful rear-wheel drive experience, it officially became GM's Global Rear-Wheel Drive Development Centre. So this led to the VE underpinnings being slated for the 5th generation Chevrolet Camaro. So once again, a team of designers and engineers were sent to Holden to collaborate on the execution, including Sang-Yup Lee, whose exterior concept had been selected. Locals took on the opportunity to work on such an iconic sports car with relish, and by now were fully integrated into GM's procedures and processes. CAD data, for example, of the latest progress could be shared across the globe instantaneously, enabling feedback almost on the spot or at least overnight based on the time zone from those still working on the car in the US, and it could be then worked on the next day back at home. Sorry. It was also no longer necessary to ship clay models because tracer models could be made using the CAD data in both studios at the same time, so they could both be viewed at once and again comments shared between the two countries. And each design centre also had a VR studio capable of showing realistic full-size virtual models viewable from any angle with 3D glasses if desired. Video conferencing tools also improved communication and relationships, and the travel started to increase again for face-to-face meetings, which further built rapport and even long-term friendships between the two teams. Further enhancing this relationship, the long wheelbase Caprice was developed as a police patrol vehicle for North America. With input from the police forces, many changes were made, including a column shifter and seats that had cutaway clearances for gun holsters. And it was very well received by the police forces. And again, that increased the level of respect for Holden's capabilities within GM. By now, Holden played a vital role in GM's global design centres, including Paytac in Shanghai, which Philip Smood helped establish. This role became even more critical following the Holden plant closure announcement in December 2013. There would be no more local vehicles to be designed, and the livelihoods of the engineers and the designers became dependent on their ability to support global projects. Fortunately, a combination of respect for its capabilities, cost effectiveness helped by the exchange rates at the time, and a surplus of projects meant that a variety of projects were awarded to Holden. So this change of status for Holden Design warranted a name change to GM Australia Design, or GMA. The ability of the local designers to create appealing concepts with a fresh perspective was highly valued by the other studios who were working on their own projects. So designers would regularly contribute to short-term projects known as sketch blitzes. A week or two was spent intensely sketching exterior and interior concepts around a brief in friendly competition with their colleagues around the globe. The idea was to collect a diverse range of ideas, with some selected for further development, either by the designer responsible or taken over by the home studio. GMA submissions were accepted with appreciation and were often selected to proceed further. A notable example was the Buick Avenir luxury car concept shown at the 2015 North American International Auto Show in Detroit. The GM Vice President of Design by then was Ed Welburn, who had a particular passion for Buick, and along with his US design team had a profound understanding of the brand heritage and design cues. Ed, like his predecessors, was a semi-regular visitor to GMA and was always generous in his praise of the team's abilities. So GMA were invited to contribute concept sketches for the Avenir. And although while Buick had an earlier presence in Australia and the designers were familiar with the brand, it could be perceived they lacked a deeper understanding of their American counterparts. However, GMA designer Warwick Leach presented a proposal that captured Welburn's heart and imagination more than any others, a massive recognition in the circumstances. So Warwick went on to lead the design execution of the concept car build in the GMA studio. The Avenir landed the Best Concept Vehicle Award at the Detroit show. Michael Simcoe, by this time, was GM International Design Vice President under Wellburn, and in a stunning success story was soon to replace him as Vice President of Global Design. The runner-up happened to be the Chevrolet Bolt EV, which was also built at the GMA studios. So Simcoe summarised GMA's design status at that point when he commented, Avenir and Bolt EV are clear illustrations of the creativity and capability we have in the Global Design Studio in Australia. To have these vehicles recognised on the world stage and to receive not one, but 2 awards from our peers is a fantastic achievement and one in which everyone should be immensely proud. Successes such as these cemented GMA's design reputation as a professional outfit with a full range of design capabilities, from concept initiation through clay and digital modelling, studio engineering, colour and trim, advertising standard imagery and animations, to final build of fully functioning models. Local talents such as Andrew Smith and Sharon Gauci accepted high-profile positions at GM&A, and others exchanged roles around the globe. Designers from Detroit and elsewhere relished any opportunity to come to sunny Melbourne to experience the family atmosphere along with the culture and climate. GMA Design were entrusted with numerous production and advanced design projects for all GM brands. Many have been unveiled to the public, while others remain under wraps. In some cases, the concepts were initiated by the local team, while in others, the basic theme was provided but needed more refinement and detailed execution. Some production examples include the Buick Enclave SUV for the China market. This required close collaboration with both the Chinese and US studios, and also engineers and suppliers in both regions. Another was the Chevrolet Blazer 7-seater, again for the Chinese market. And this was shown as a concept car precursor called the FNR Carryall, which once again, the Holden Studio, GMA studios were involved with. There were 2 electric autonomous vehicle concepts that were built as well that required complex and challenging electromechanical functions that were developed by the GMA team. One was the Cadillac Social Space, which had a multi-action door opening system. The other was the Buick Smart Pod, which had animated LED headlamps and aircraft-style reclining seats, once again developed by the local team. Final project that was undertaken by GMA Design prior to its closure, along with the whole Holden brand in 2020, was a coupe concept for Buick. So it was completed by the North American studio and it was recently revealed as the Wildcat EV concept. This continuation of local product development was no reflection on the professionalism and passion of the 140 design staff there at the end. Its existence was hard fought for by its many supporters at GM's headquarters. It was primarily a decision based on a hard financial and global reality in a fast changing world. Right to the end, GMA Design and their engineering colleagues were highly regarded for their expertise in achieving a lot with a little, honed over decades through the necessities of being resident of an isolated nation with a small population. And while technology helped reduce the tyranny of distance, the can-do mindset remained and was a source of great pride and camaraderie within the Holden family. This is what most impressed the visitors from Michigan and inspired them to apply as much as possible to their own work ethic. In return, the Australians were shown the benefits of discipline and rigorous application of processes to improve the outcomes for the product and the customer, things like was always passionate about anyway. First glance, the term creative tension can have a negative connotation. The reconnection of the Australian and North American design studios over the last 3 decades of the former's existence certainly resulted in some cultural challenges that needed to be overcome for cooperation in a creative environment to be successful. However, creative tension can be defined positively as an aid to facilitating creativity and change, which is after all what the design process is all about. Each design team brought a unique set of skills and experiences, which, when combined and shared, helped write a significant chapter in the story of Trans-Pacific automotive partnerships. Thank you. Questions or comments?
I just wanted to firstly say thank you, John, after such a long time being a member, presenting such a fascinating talk. It's very insightful.
Thank you.
I've wanted something like this for a long time. Just personally, as the Vice President, want to thank you very much for this.
It's okay.
Are there any comments or questions from the floor? Or I think there was a comment I saw pop up. So there's a big comment here from Jenny and Chris. So we have, oh no, I think Jenny was the last presentation. Chris has said, thank you. Oh, did you just want to talk, Chris? Maybe, did you want to unmute yourself and you should be able to unmute yourself, I think.
Take away from this, I'm just commenting back to, I didn't have the right answers when they asked me, when they commented, so I was just commenting on my commenters. So let's wait till this gentleman's done.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Okay, cool. Were there any, if I have a look, if there are anyone with their hands up? Talk. We've got Louis. So Louis, did you want to make a comment or a question for John?
It's a question for John. You talk about the process that was, shall we say, imposed on the Australians. One thing I'm curious about, was there any creep in this process? And the reason I'm asking that question is the final development of a vehicle is critical, but if they've run out of budget, it gets short-shifted. Can you make any comment on that?
I would say that global vehicle development process was pretty tightly adhered to, and budget was probably not so much the issue. It was more just other delays maybe caused by unforeseen circumstances. So occasionally the process would get shifted to the right a little bit as a timeline, but then once it was shifted, it was held once again very tightly. So yes, it did enforce a lot of high expectations on the team to deliver to their next customer down the timeline in a timely way with the information they needed. So yeah, it was always very closely managed and controlled to make sure that happened. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's okay.
Paul Berenger.
John, question, some of the photographs you've shown there, the model work, the fabrication work of those models is absolutely beautiful.
Yes.
I understand they were mostly done in Australia by Australia.
Absolutely, yeah. So we had a very sophisticated and talented team of fabricators that assembled all those vehicles. So clay models, fabricators, spray painters, the whole works. We had a separate studio with a lot of a paint shop and lots of facilities to do that sort of work. Yeah, everything from the clay model initiation through to running vehicles.
Was it all in-house or was
Yeah, it was all in-house. Mostly in-house. Sometimes we would ship some stuff, to places like that.
Yeah.
That Chevrolet Blazer that I showed was actually made by an outside supplier in China, but we had a lot of control over that as well. Yeah. We've got a couple of minutes for a couple of anecdotes. If I
Absolutely.
take 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Just talk about Chuck Jordan's visit, a couple of stories about that. He visited Holden a couple of times. The first time was when, actually on Richard Filazzo's first day at Holden, and an elaborate marquee had been set up for Chuck's benefit. And, Chuck was walking around and Richard happened to be there. And, Chuck says to Richard, "Oh, they've got a lot of trouble for me." And Richard said, "Yeah, I thought this was for my benefit." And another time he visited, I was actually sent as a young designer to pick him up from the airport. So they sent me out in one of the Holden Caprice sort of limousines to go pick him up. I was very nervous, like I had to chauffeur drive this guy bigger than God, effectively, back to Melbourne from the airport. And but he was charming. He was the loveliest guy. I had a great chat. It was awesome. Really good to meet him. And talking about the Camaro, when we did that program, an interior designer by the name of John Zeleno came over with his very young family, a couple of young kids. They rented a house in Brighton on Melbourne's Bayside suburbs. He had already been warned by all the Aussies in Detroit before he came over about all the poisonous spiders and, lethal animals and so on. We'd like to exaggerate that sort of thing. And but the first night they stayed there in the kids' bedroom, there was a huntsman spider up in the corner of the bedroom. And, as Australians Day. They're very menacing, ugly looking spiders, very big, but they're harmless. But if you see one for the first time, it's totally going to freak you out. And apparently the kids are just bawling their eyes out saying, I want to go home. Culture shock. All right.
Well, can we all join in thanking John for such a great presentation?